Let's make history. The neighborhood of Corona, Queens was originally called West Flushing. And I go into more detail on my video, The History of East Elmhurst. Check that out if you haven't already. It was called West Flushing, and that was due to the Flushing Railroad service, which helped to boost the economy of that region, send the message that Corona was the crown jewel of Queens. And of course, Corona is Spanish for crown. The idea to name it that and come up with that phrase because of the Crown Building Company, which was also helping to develop that territory. Before the arrival of the Flushing Railroad, the land was divided amongst 12 families who used it for farming. Then came the railroad, then came the racetrack, which was alongside of the railroad. That got a lot of attention. They were dumping loads of ashes because people would heat their stoves from burning coal and other things, and they would dump the ashes along Bowery Bay and various areas. Rikers Island actually was one of those places that was used to house this garbage and fiery mountains of ash and garbage. I speak about that on my video, The History of Rikers Island. Check that out if you haven't already. Subscribe to me on YouTube, follow me on Instagram and TikTok. So that ash stood there, and the ash was placed there around like 1905, 1907, and it stood there. Think of it, World War I took place, so certainly that wasn't a priority then. So it stood there all the way until the 1930s when city developer Robert Moses had it cleaned up for the first World Fair, which would take place in Flushing Meadows / Corona Park. And eventually, Robert Moses also had the ash moved from Rikers Island because you could see it across the water. And a lot of that ash was actually brought over to Staten Island, various parts of Staten Island, but that's the topic for a future video. In the first half of the 20th century, Corona was an Italian and black neighborhood. The nucleus of the Italian neighborhood was along Corona Avenue by 108th Street, and the center of the black community was north of Roosevelt Avenue. In the 1950s, a huge wave of Dominicans made their way into Corona, and it's been a Latin American neighborhood ever since. Closer to the 21st century, you had other groups of Hispanics who also settled in Corona. Speaking of Dominicans, actually, the Beatnuts are from Corona. Nori, who co-hosts Drink Champs, he's from Left Rack City, which is in Corona. And then, of course, Kool G Rap.